1928. Capone's empire ran on blood, 47 men dead in 6 months, bodies floating in the Chicago River. Then Bumpy Johnson walked into his fortress with no gun, no army, just one offer. He walked out untouchable. What did Bumpy put on that table that made the most violent man alive choose protection over execution? Harlem woke up to silence, and in a neighborhood that had been drowning in blood for 6 months straight, silence meant someone had just rewritten the rules with a knife to every throat in the city. The streets had been a slaughterhouse, every single morning for half a year. New bodies, dead men crumpled in alleys with their faces blown clean off. Nothing left but raw meat and shattered bone. Corpses yanked from car trunks with their skulls caved in, so deep you could see brain matter leaking out. Policy runners found on tenement stairs, hands clutching gut wounds that wouldn't stop pumping blood, dying slow while neighbors stepped over them on their way to work. August alone butchered 14 men, 14 coffins, 14 families burying what little the coroner could scrape together. Dutch Schultz's animals made it a public execution show. They'd blow a man's head apart at noon on 125th Street, step over the twitching corpse while blood was still spreading across the pavement, and rob him blind before the body went cold. The killing had become theater, daily entertainment, routine murder, then overnight. Like someone cut the city's throat. It stopped. No warning. No treaty signed in blood-soaked back rooms. No negotiation anyone could name. Just sudden, total, suffocating silence, the kind that makes 20-year cops check their backs because they know something massive just shifted in the dark, and they're too blind to see the predator watching them. Detective Franklin stood on Lenox and 135th at dawn, watching the morning crowds move like nothing apocalyptic had happened. But the apocalypse had happened. The entire criminal underworld had been rebuilt overnight while the city slept. The same runners who'd been trying to murder each other 72 hours ago were back on their corners conducting business like old friends. The same policy banks that had been firebombed into charred ruins were open. Money flowing like water. Men who should have been digging each other's graves were passing on the street with respectful nods, hands visible and empty, guns staying holstered. Someone gave an order, Franklin's partner muttered, scanning rooftops for snipers who weren't there. Someone powerful enough to make every killer in Harlem fall in line simultaneously. Who? Franklin asked, though he knew the answer would keep him up nights. That's what terrifies me. Frank, nobody knows, and everyone's too scared to ask. These weren't reformed men who'd discovered Jesus in jail cells. These were professional killers, men who'd gut you slowly for looking at them wrong, who'd torch your building with your family inside for missing a payment, who'd put bullets in children to teach their fathers about consequences. They didn't stop killing because morality suddenly mattered. They stopped because someone more dangerous than all of them combined had walked into a room and made it crystal clear the war ends right now. The new law is set in stone, and the first man to pull a trigger gets dismembered alive and fed to the river piece by screaming piece. But there were no names attached to this new order, no faces, no organization to investigate. The usual street rats who'd betray their own mothers for pocket change had absolutely nothing to sell. Worse, they looked genuinely terrified. Not confused, not angry. Terrified. They knew something, but had been shown exactly what happened to men who talked. And it was worse than anything Franklin could imagine. Franklin had walked these streets for 12 brutal years. He'd watched gang wars ignite and burn out, seen criminal empires built on mountains of corpses collapse overnight in rivers of blood. But he'd never witnessed violence cease like this instant. Total. Absolute. Like someone had grabbed the entire underworld by its collective throat and squeezed until every single person remembered how to obey or die, trying. History worships violence, loves the body counts, the dramatic shootouts, the photographs of dead gangsters leaking onto sidewalks. The newspapers would chronicle every execution, every bombing, every corpse pulled from the river with concrete shoes. But history forgets the silence that follows. That's not sexy enough for headlines. Yet the silence is where real power breathes and feeds. Because when 100 stone killers wake up and simultaneously decide their guns stay holstered, when every gang leader from Sugar Hill to San Juan Hill chooses survival over pride at the exact same heartbeat, when the entire criminal underworld holds its breath in perfect terrified unison, that's not luck or coincidence or good timing. That's absolute dominion. That's someone becoming God. Someone had rewritten reality itself, not with manifestos or speeches, but with the kind of merciless mathematics that made obedience more profitable than rebellion and made defiance more expensive than a bullet-riddled corpse in a ditch. The silence held like a death grip. All morning, all week, all month. No fresh bodies, no gunshots echoing off buildings, no screams cutting through the night. Just obedience. Perfect. Unquestioning. Terrified obedience. When an entire city goes silent at once, someone just became the law and the law doesn't forgive. The Harlem numbers racket printed cash faster than the U.S. Mint could dream of. And every gangster with ambition and a loaded gun wanted to bathe in it. Every single day, tens of thousands of black workers' porters destroying their spines for white men's luggage. Maids scrubbing floors until their hands bled raw. Factory slaves breathing industrial poison for starvation wages would gamble their last precious nickels on a 3-digit lottery number, hoping to escape hell for one day. Individually, it looked like nothing. Pocket change, desperation money, but collectively, across 100 savage blocks, 7 days a week. 52 weeks a year. The numbers moved more liquid cash than most of Manhattan's legitimate banks. By Friday afternoon, the policy banks were literally drowning in more money than they could count. More than they could hide. More than they could protect. And that kind of money attracted apex predators. Dutch Schultz smelled blood first. He controlled the Bronx like a personal torture chamber, his enforcers extracting protection tribute from every speakeasy and numbers operation with broken bones and strangling wire. But Harlem represented something different, a mature, brutally efficient system generating obscene profits with mathematical precision. Schultz wanted to own it, wanted to bleed it, wanted every dollar. So did Legs Diamond. So did the Italian syndicates clawing north from downtown, rabid with hunger and sick of fighting over table scraps when there was a feast happening uptown. So they declared total war, not with negotiations or warnings, with systematic execution designed to maximize terror. A policy banker named Claude Hendricks got ripped from his bed at 3 a.m. by 4 men with guns and bad intentions. They drove him screaming to the Harlem River, wired his hands behind his back with baling wire that cut to bone, jammed a Sudut .38 revolver against the base of his skull, and pulled the trigger. The bullet punched through his brainstem and exploded out his face. What remained of Claude Hendricks went into the black water for the fish and rats. 7 days later, 2 of Schultz's collectors got ambushed on 8th Avenue in broad daylight. Shotgun blasts through the car windows at point-blank range took both their heads clean off at the jawline. Blood sprayed across the upholstery in arterial fountains. Brain matter painted the dashboard. Their cigarettes were still burning in the ashtray when the cops arrived to scrape up the pieces. The violence metastasized like cancer through Harlem's veins. Firebombs through policy bank windows, turning offices into screaming infernos that cremated people alive. Drive-by Thompson gun massacres that murdered runners and innocent bystanders alike. Leaving the sidewalks looking like slaughterhouse floors, enforcers getting shanked in dark hallways, left to bleed out on the stairs in spreading pools while tenants stepped over their dying bodies on the way to work. The money kept flowing in rivers, but protecting it became financially impossible. Every policy bank needed armed guards standing watch 24 hours, men with shotguns and dead eyes who cost real money. Every runner needed armed escorts just to collect bets. Every payout required a small private army with Thompson submachine guns standing ready to turn any threat into hamburger meat. The profit margins didn't just shrink, they collapsed completely, crushed under the weight of security costs that multiplied like plague rats. Then the real nightmare arrived, the police heat, when black bodies stacked up in Harlem's alleys. The cops barely glanced up from their morning coffee and bribes. Business as usual. Dead coloreds didn't matter to City Hall, but the instant white gangsters started getting their brains blown out uptown, suddenly the mayor discovered he had a conscience. Suddenly there were task forces and crackdowns. Raids became weekly, arrests became nightly. The protection money required just to keep crooked cops from destroying everything doubled, then tripled, then became a crushing weekly ransom that bled the banks white. Madame Stephanie St. Clair sat alone in her Edgecombe Avenue office at midnight, surrounded by ledgers, doing the mathematics of extinction. Not the lottery numbers her desperate customers played, the real numbers, the survival equation, revenue versus expenditure, profit versus total annihilation. The war was costing more than complete surrender would. She wasn't alone in seeing the truth. Every banker with functioning eyes could read the blood-red ink. Every syndicate boss capable of basic arithmetic understood the brutal calculus. You couldn't shoot your way to profitability when every bullet cost you customers, brought police raids that shut you down for days, and ate your margins alive. The violence had stopped being strategy. It was just death and debt now, expensive, pointless, suicidal death. But nobody could afford to blink first. Pride was expensive, but showing weakness in this business was a guaranteed death sentence. So the bodies kept stacking up like cordwood while the bank accounts hemorrhaged, and the entire empire built on nickels and dimes, and desperate hope teetered on the edge of total collapse. Stephanie stared at the red numbers spreading across her books like blood spatter, and understood with perfect clarity someone had to end this war in the next 72 hours. Or the war would end all of them forever. War doesn't fail because it's immoral. War fails when the corpses cost more than the kingdom. Harlem didn't send their most dangerous killer to negotiate with Al Capone. They sent an accountant who made the deliberate choice to walk into a fortress unarmed. Bumpy Johnson wasn't the biggest enforcer in Harlem's brutal hierarchy, wasn't the loudest, wasn't the one with the most corpses to his credit. But when Stephanie St. Clair and the other desperate policy bankers locked themselves in a room to decide who could possibly walk into Capone's Chicago stronghold and negotiate their collective survival, only one name made any strategic sense. Bumpy spoke the only language that mattered to men like Capone: cold profit and colder loss. He'd been running security for St. Clair's operation for 3 blood-soaked years, but his real value wasn't muscle or intimidation, it was his mathematical mind. He knew precisely how much revenue each runner generated down to the penny. He understood exactly what the corrupt cops extorted every week. He could calculate the war's daily financial hemorrhage in his sleep, while other enforcers were busy breaking kneecaps in alleys. Bumpy was building mental spreadsheets, analyzing profit margins, tracking losses like a Wall Street economist who happened to kill people professionally when mathematics demanded it. They needed someone who could sit across a table from the most violent man in America and demonstrate through irrefutable financial analysis that murdering Harlem's bankers would prove vastly more expensive than controlling them. So they equipped him with a leather briefcase containing detailed financial records, comprehensive cost-benefit analyses, and meticulously documented revenue projections. No weapon, no backup muscle, no insurance policy. Just numbers and the crystal-clear understanding that if Capone rejected the proposal or felt insulted, Bumpy's mutilated corpse would be discovered floating face down in Lake Michigan by morning, if it was ever discovered at all. "Are you absolutely certain about this approach?" Stephanie asked him the night before his departure, genuine fear cutting through her usual iron control. Bumpy met her terrified eyes with his characteristic calm, those emotionless dead eyes that always made people profoundly nervous because they revealed absolutely nothing. No fear, no doubt, no humanity. "You have a better alternative." She didn't. None of them did. They were out of options and running out of time. The train journey to Chicago devoured 19 brutal hours. Bumpy sat isolated in the colored car with the briefcase balanced on his lap like a bomb, watching America's industrial wasteland scroll past beyond the window. He felt no particular fear emotion was a luxury liability he'd learned to surgically remove from his professional calculations years ago. But he wasn't delusional about the odds either. He knew the grim statistics intimately. Roughly 9 out of every 10 messengers who walked into hostile enemy territory completely unarmed, carrying business propositions instead of loaded weapons, never walked back out alive. Ever. History was essentially an unmarked mass grave filled with men who genuinely believed they could reason with professional killers. Diplomats discovered with their throats slit ear to ear. Negotiators who simply vanished into unmarked graves. Peace envoys executed with bullets to the back of the skull. The message gets delivered. The messenger gets discarded like contaminated garbage. But Bumpy possessed one critical advantage those corpses hadn't. He wasn't coming to Chicago to beg Capone for mercy or grovel for his life. He was offering the most dangerous man alive a demonstrably superior business model with significantly better returns. The Lexington Hotel dominated Chicago's South Side like a medieval fortress designed for modern urban warfare. Capone controlled the entire 4th floor 25 rooms, systematically converted into a heavily fortified compound featuring reinforced steel doors, armed sentries positioned at every strategic entrance, and sufficient stockpiled weaponry to successfully repel a sustained military assault. Walking into that building completely unarmed wasn't courage or bravery. It was meticulously calculated insanity that looked suicidal from every rational angle. Bumpy walked through the opulent marble lobby carrying nothing but his briefcase. Within 5 seconds, 4 large men in expensive tailored suits with unmistakable gun bulges destroying the line surrounded him completely. They didn't bother searching him or patting him down. They didn't need to verify anything. If he'd been foolish enough to bring a concealed weapon, he'd already be bleeding out on the expensive imported floor. They escorted him upstairs in complete silence, down a long, quiet hallway that felt like walking toward execution, through a massive reinforced door, into an intimate private dining room where Al Capone sat motionless at the head of an enormous mahogany table, flanked by Jake Guzik and Frank Nitti, his brilliant accountant and his merciless enforcer, representing the calculating brain and the savage sledgehammer of his empire. Capone didn't stand to greet him, didn't extend his hand, didn't smile or offer any gesture of welcome. Just watched Bumpy enter with the cold professional assessment of a master butcher evaluating livestock on the killing floor, clinical, detached, already mentally planning exactly where to make the cuts. Bumpy set the briefcase on the polished table between them with steady hands. No trembling, no hesitation, no visible fear. "Mr. Capone," he said, his voice carrying no trace of fear or deference, flat and cold as a morgue examination table. "I've come to demonstrate why Harlem generates significantly more profit for you operating independently than it ever would under your direct violent control." Capone leaned back slowly in his chair, thick fingers forming a calculated steeple, his eyes like frozen concrete studying every micro-expression, every breath, every subtle movement, searching methodically for any hint of weakness to exploit. "You have exactly 5 minutes," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, which somehow made the threat infinitely worse. "Use them wisely, because if I don't like what I hear, my boys will spend the rest of the night scraping what's left of you off the pavement with garden spades." Bumpy opened the briefcase with steady hands. The numbers would do all the talking now. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't negotiate. Numbers just are. The most dangerous man in any room isn't the one brandishing the gun. It's the one who doesn't need one and somehow walks out alive. The room smelled like cigars and death. Bumpy walked in and heard the door lock behind him. One chandelier cast yellow light across a long table. Al Capone sat at the end, stone-faced, with Jake Guzik and Frank Nitti on either side. 3 men, 3 ways to die. Capone didn't stand up, didn't shake hands, didn't say hello, just stared at Bumpy like he was looking at a bug, trying to decide if it was worth crushing. The silence was a knife. Bumpy knew walking in here was a death sentence, but he didn't expect this, the total absence of threat. No guns in his face, no goons cracking knuckles, just cold eyes studying him, waiting to see if he'd break. Most men would have started talking immediately, would have filled the silence with nervous words, desperate explanations, anything to stop the suffocating quiet. That's what Capone wanted, to watch him sweat, to see him crack. Bumpy put the briefcase on the table and said nothing. Guzik shifted, Nitty's jaw clenched, but Capone's face didn't move. Eyes like frozen steel, expression like carved stone. Not angry, not amused, just calculating. The silence went on. 30 seconds. A minute. Long enough that Bumpy could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 3 killers deciding if he lived or died. Then Capone spoke. "You got balls walking in here." His voice was quiet. That made it scarier. Quiet men were more dangerous than loud ones. "Know how many guys brought me deals this year?" Bumpy stayed silent. Wasn't really a question. 17, Capone said. "Know how many walked out alive?" "Not 17. Capone's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. 3. And 2 of those were because I needed them breathing. Simple math. 14 men walked into this room with deals. 14 men got carried out in pieces. "So tell me," Capone said, leaning forward, "why shouldn't I add you to that list?" This was it. The moment between breathing and bleeding out on this expensive carpet. Bumpy had prepared for threats, for guns, for violence. Not for this, for Capone treating him like a math problem instead of an insult. "Because killing me loses you money," Bumpy said, simple, direct. Capone's eyes narrowed, not angry, interested. "Show me." Bumpy opened the briefcase. Slow, fast movements got you shot. He pulled out the first folder and slid it across the table. "That's what the Harlem War costs you every week," Bumpy said. "In cash." Guzik grabbed it, started reading. His eyebrows went up. Capone didn't look at the papers, kept staring at Bumpy, testing him, waiting to see if he'd flinch, if he'd look away, if he'd show fear. Bumpy stared back. The silence came back, heavier, like the air before a storm. Nitty's hand moved toward his jacket, not threatening yet, just ready. One word from Capone and Bumpy would be dead before he hit the floor. Guzik put the folder down, looked at Capone. Something passed between them, a silent conversation. Bumpy couldn't read. Capone leaned back. The tension didn't break, just changed shape. "You got 4 more minutes," Capone said. "Don't waste them." Bumpy pulled out the second folder. Big decisions don't need bullets. They need numbers. And right now, the numbers were the only thing keeping Bumpy breathing. Capone didn't kill Bumpy, And that was the most dangerous thing he could have done. Bumpy spread the papers across the table like a poker hand. Each page was proof that the war was bleeding everyone dry. "This is what Dutch Schultz costs you," Bumpy said, pointing to the first column. "Not what he makes you, what he costs." Guzik leaned in, reading fast. His finger traced down the numbers. 14 dead in 6 weeks, Bumpy said. "Every body brings cops. Every raid shuts you down for 3 days minimum. Every shutdown loses money. Then you gotta pay the cops double to look the other way because white guys are dying now." He slid another page forward. "This was Harlem's weekly take before the war. This is what it is now. The difference was brutal. You're losing money fighting for territory you could be collecting from," Bumpy said. "Every bullet Dutch fires costs you customers. Every body in the street brings more heat. The war isn't helping anymore. It's just expensive." Capone still hadn't touched the papers. His eyes stayed on Bumpy, reading him like Guzik was reading the numbers. "You saying I should let Harlem run free?" Capone's voice was flat, cold. "No," Bumpy said. "I'm saying you should stop paying for a war when you could be collecting tribute instead." That word landed hard. Tribute, not partnership. Submission with a price tag. Bumpy pulled out another document. "This is what Harlem's worth if you take it by force. This is what it's worth if you control it through deals." The second number was 3 times bigger. Guzik's eyes went wide. He looked at Capone, then back at the paper, then at Capone again. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The numbers said everything. Nitti finally spoke. "Could be bullshit. Could be," Bumpy said, "or it could be the smartest move you make all year." Capone's jaw worked, grinding teeth. Then slowly, he reached for the documents, picked them up, read them. The room went silent. Bumpy watched him, watched the gangster become a businessman, watched the killer turn into a calculator. This was the moment where emotion either won or died to profit. Capone read every page, took his time. Guzik waited. Nitti waited. Bumpy waited. When Capone looked up, something had changed in his face. Not warmth, just recognition. "You're saying I make more money letting Harlem live than choking it dead. Dead territory doesn't pay," Bumpy said. Silence. But different now. Thinking silence. Capone set the papers down, tapped them with one finger. "What's the split? 20% to you, 80 stays in Harlem." Nitti laughed. Hard. "You got balls." Capone raised one hand. Nitti went silent like someone cut his throat. "Why 20? Capone asked. "Because that's what peace costs," Bumpy said. "You get 20% of everything. No war, no raids, no heat. We get 80 and freedom to operate. Everybody eats. Nobody bleeds." Guzik was nodding. Small movements, but nodding. The math worked. Capone stared at the ceiling like the answer was written there. The silence stretched so long Bumpy thought he'd failed, thought any second Nitti would pull his gun and end this. Then Capone smiled. Not friendly. The smile of a shark smelling blood. "You're smarter than you look," Capone said. "Territory isn't kept with bullets. It's kept with business." Capone didn't just accept the deal. He flipped it. 20% works, he said, still wearing that dead smile. "But I want something else." Bumpy's gut tightened. Here it comes. The trap, where the reasonable man shows his teeth. "What?" Bumpy asked. "I want to know how you run it." Silence. Bumpy's brain scrambled. "Run what?" "The numbers." Capone leaned forward. "Harlem's whole system. The policy banks. The runners. Everything. You make more money per block than my entire Cicero operation. I want to know how. Guzik stared at Capone like he'd just seen God. Nitti looked confused, angry. You want us to teach you, Bumpy said slowly. I want integration, Capone corrected. Not lessons. You keep running Harlem. But my people watch. Learn the system. Take it to Chicago. Detroit. Philly. Make it bigger. Bumpy's blood went cold. This wasn't protection. This was takeover. You're not just taking a cut, Bumpy said. You're taking the whole blueprint. I'm making you part of the empire, Capone said. There's a difference. What difference? Partners don't get killed when they're useful. There it was. The blade hidden in silk. Bumpy came here selling peace. Capone was buying Harlem's soul and calling it business. Not just the money, the knowledge. Not just the territory, the system itself. If I say no, Bumpy asked. Capone's smile didn't change. Then we go back to war. Except now I know exactly what Harlem's worth, and I'll pay whatever it costs to take it. Dutch doesn't care about profit. I do, which means I'll bleed you slow, smart, and you'll lose anyway. Checkmate with a handshake. Bumpy looked at the papers on the table. He came to sell peace. Capone was buying Harlem's future. What's my job? Bumpy asked. You're the bridge, Capone said. Keep Harlem running smooth. My guys come watch. You show them how it works. They learn. They report to me. You report to me. Harlem looks independent. But underneath, you're mine. Guzik nodded. Smart. You get peace. We get expansion. Nobody dies. Unless someone breaks the deal, Nitti added, cracking his knuckles. Capone stood up. First time he'd moved. Walked around the table slow, predator-like. Stopped right next to Bumpy. You came here to save Harlem, Capone said quietly. I'm letting you, but nothing's free. You want peace. You pay with loyalty. You want protection. You pay with access. You walked in a messenger. You can walk out a partner, but you don't walk out free. Bumpy looked up at him, at the man who built an empire on blood and fear, the man who just figured out how to turn Harlem from enemy to asset. Deal? Capone asked. Bumpy stood, met his eyes, shook his hand. Deal. Bumpy came begging for survival. He left with power and chains. The handshake sealed Harlem's fate in 3 seconds. Nobody hears about this, Capone said, dropping Bumpy's hand. Not cops, not papers, not even your own people unless they gotta know. Why? Bumpy asked, though he already knew. Because the second this goes public, it dies. Guzik said, Dutch finds out you're paying Capone. He'll think you're weak. He'll hit harder. The Italians find out Capone got Harlem without a fight. They'll want their peace. Cops find out there's peace. They'll break it to keep the bribes coming. And your own people, Nitti added, voice like gravel. Find out you dealt with white gangsters. They'll call you a sellout. Might kill you themselves. Capone nodded. This deal lives in the shadows. Tell people the war stopped because it got too expensive. That's true enough. But the details, the structure, the money that stays between us. How do we enforce it if nobody knows? Bumpy asked. Capone smiled. Same way all real laws work. Fear and consequences. He walked to the window, looked out at Chicago. Someone breaks the peace. They don't know they're breaking our deal. They just know they started a war they can't win. We don't explain. We don't warn. We just make them disappear, so quiet nobody remembers they tried. An invisible law, Bumpy said. The strongest kind. Capone said. Laws everyone sees get broken all the time. Laws nobody sees. Those get obeyed because people don't know they're breaking them till it's too late. Bumpy understood. This wasn't a treaty. It was a ghost enforced by what would happen if anyone disturbed the silence. "What if someone finds out?" Bumpy asked. Capone turned from the window. "Then you handle it, fast, before it spreads." "Handle it how?" Nitty answered. "However you need to. Quietly, no public hits, no statements. Just make the problem disappear." 3 weeks later. Bumpy got tested. A young runner named Marcus started asking questions. Loud ones. Why'd the war stop so suddenly? Why'd Dutch pull back? Why weren't the Italians pushing anymore? Marcus was smart. Dangerous because he was connecting dots that should stay disconnected. Stephanie told Bumpy, "The kid's talking. Says something doesn't add up. Says someone made a deal. He say who? Not yet. But he's digging." Bumpy found Marcus on a corner in Sugar Hill, collecting bets. Walked up casual, almost friendly. "Here you got questions," Bumpy said. Marcus looked at him. Young, maybe 23, with hungry eyes that got people killed. "Just trying to understand things." "Understanding's good," Bumpy said, "but some things work better when you don't understand them." "That a threat?" "That's advice." Marcus tensed. His hand moved toward his waistband. Bumpy saw the gun outline under his jacket. "You gonna shoot me for asking questions?" Marcus said. "No." Bumpy said, "I'm giving you a choice. Keep asking and find out why silence is worse than noise. Or take your money, do your job, and live to spend it." They stared at each other. Bumpy didn't blink, didn't threaten, just waited. Marcus's hand moved away from the gun. "Just trying to eat," Marcus said quietly. "Then eat," Bumpy said, "and stop chewing on things that'll choke you." Marcus nodded, went back to work, never asked another question. That night, Bumpy called Chicago. Guzik answered. "Had a problem," Bumpy said. "It's handled." "How handled?" "The quiet way." "Good. Keep it that way." Bumpy hung up, stared at his reflection in the window. He came to Chicago to save Harlem. Instead, he became the enforcer of a law nobody could name, the keeper of a secret that would burn everything if it saw light. The biggest power is the power nobody's allowed to talk about. Dutch Schultz pulled out of Harlem like a general retreating from a losing war. No announcement, no surrender speech. His boys just stopped showing up. The bombings stopped. The drive-bys stopped. The collections stopped. 1 week, Schultz's crew was kicking in doors and shotgunning policy bankers. The next week, they were ghosts. Word on the street was Schultz got a message. Nobody knew from who. Nobody knew what it said. But whatever it was, made a man who'd built his empire on bloodshed decide Harlem wasn't worth another corpse. The violence didn't fade. It vanished, like someone flipped a switch and the killing just stopped. Within 2 weeks, the policy banks reopened. Runners went back to their corners. The daily numbers started flowing again, pennies and nickels and dimes pouring in like water. The cash that had dried up during the war came roaring back. And with it came something Harlem hadn't seen in months, stability. But it wasn't freedom. Every week, 20% of the take got packed into briefcases and sent to Chicago. Clean, quiet, like taxes to a government nobody voted for. The money left Harlem on trains, moved through intermediaries, ended up in Capone's counting rooms 1,000 miles away. Nobody talked about it. The runners didn't know where the cut went. The bankers knew but didn't ask questions. Only a handful of people understood the full picture that Harlem was paying for peace, the way a protection racket pays to not get burned down. Stephanie Saint. Claire watched the money move and hated every dollar that left, but she watched the bodies not pile up and hated that less. "We're not free," she told Bumpy one night in her office. "No," Bumpy said, "but we're alive. They're a difference. Ask the 14 men who died in August." She couldn't argue with that. Dead men don't count money. Dead men don't feed families. Dead men don't build anything. Harlem was breathing again, and breathing came with a price. The streets didn't celebrate. There were no parades, no parties, no declarations of victory. Because everyone who mattered understood this wasn't victory. It was survival dressed up as business. The cops noticed the change and didn't like it. Detective Franklin walked his beat watching the policy banks operate openly, watching the runners collect without fear, watching money move through Harlem like blood through veins. No violence meant no arrests. No arrests meant no headlines. No headlines meant the mayor stopped caring. Something changed, Franklin told his partner. And nobody's telling us what. Does it matter streets are quiet? Quiet means someone's in control. I want to know who. But the deeper he dug, the less he found. Every lead went cold. Every informant claimed ignorance. The new order had no name, no face, no address. Just results. The peace held through September, through October. By November, people stopped waiting for the war to restart. The new normal became just normal. Runners collected. Banks paid out. The system worked. Harlem wasn't free. But Harlem was eating. And in a neighborhood where freedom had always been a dream and survival was the daily grind, eating mattered more than principles. The money kept flowing. 20% to Chicago, 80% staying home. Every week, like clockwork, like taxes, like tribute to a king who never showed his face but whose power was felt in every peaceful corner. Every open bank, every runner who made it home alive. Nobody celebrated because everyone was too busy counting. Peace isn't justice. Peace is just the pause between wars. But when the alternative is bodies in the street and mothers burying sons, peace looks a lot like victory, even when you know it's bought and paid for. Nobody celebrated because everyone was too busy making money. His name was Vincent "Vinny" Cole, and he thought he was untouchable. Vinny ran a small crew in Sugar Hill, 5 guys, maybe 6, moving weight and running girls. Small time compared to the policy banks. But loud. Vinny liked being loud, liked making sure people knew he was there, that he wasn't afraid of anyone. He'd heard the stories about Bumpy Johnson, heard the whispers that Bumpy had some kind of protection, that messing with him was a bad idea. But Vinny had been in Harlem his whole life and never seen Bumpy do anything that scared him. So Vinny decided to test it. It started small. Vinny's boys started collecting on corners that were supposed to be protected, started leaning on runners who worked for the policy banks, started talking loud in speakeasies about how the old guard was soft, how the new generation wasn't afraid. Word got back to Bumpy within a week. Stephanie brought it to him personally. Vinny Cole's pushing boundaries, testing you. What's he want? Bumpy asked. Respect, territory, maybe just to see if the stories are true. What do you want me to do about it? What you always do, Stephanie said. Handle it. Bumpy didn't go see Vinny, didn't send his boys to crack skulls, didn't make threats or fire warning shots. He made a phone call. One phone call to Chicago. 30 seconds of conversation. Then he hung up and waited. 3 days later, Vinny tried to collect from a speakeasy on Lenox Avenue. The owner, a man who'd always paid Vinny's protection money without complaint, told him no. What? Vinny said, genuinely confused. I said no. I'm not paying you anymore. You know what happens when you don't pay. The owner just stared at him. Do what you gotta do. Vinny couldn't believe it. He sent 2 of his boys back that night to teach the owner a lesson. They walked into the speakeasy, bats in hand, ready to break bones. The owner sat at the bar. Calm. Waiting. Last chance, one of Vinny's boys said. Touch me and you're dead, the owner said. Not a threat. A fact. They laughed, swung the bats. The next morning, both of Vinny's boys were found in an alley with broken legs and a message carved into their backs. Wrong side. Vinny went to his usual suppliers, the ones who sold him product, who fronted him cash, who kept his operation running. Every single one told him the same thing. "We're done doing business with you." "Why?" Vinny demanded. No one would say. Just closed doors in his face. Within a week, Vinny's crew started deserting. His top earner quit. His enforcer disappeared. His girls found new pimps. One by one, the pieces of his operation fell apart like someone had pulled a thread and watched it unravel. Vinny finally understood. He went looking for Bumpy, found him at a pool hall on 135th Street, shooting alone. "What did you do?" Vinny said, voice shaking with rage and fear. Bumpy lined up a shot, sank the 8-ball. "Nothing. Bullshit. My whole operation's falling apart. My people are deserting. Nobody will work with me. You did something." Bumpy set down the cue stick, looked at Vinny for the first time. "I didn't touch you. Vinny, I didn't threaten anyone. Didn't break any legs. Didn't steal your business." "Then why?" "Because you touched something that didn't belong to you," Bumpy said quietly. "And the system corrected itself." "What system? What the fuck are you talking about?" Bumpy stepped closer. Close enough that Vinny could see the absolute absence of mercy in his eyes. "You wanted to test me. See if the stories were true. Now you know. I don't need to hurt you. I don't need to kill you. I just need to let the world know you're out of bounds, and the world handles the rest." "That's not fair." "Fair." Bumpy almost smiled. "Vinny, fair is for children. This is business, and you just learned that in this business. Some people aren't protected by guns. They're protected by structure, and structure doesn't fight back. It just stops feeding you." Vinny stood there, shaking, understanding finally sinking in. He hadn't been beaten. He'd been erased, not by violence, but by a system that simply decided he didn't exist anymore. "What do I do?" Vinny whispered. "You leave Harlem," Bumpy said, "tonight, and you never come back." Vinny left that night, took a train to Philadelphia, and was never seen in Harlem again. Bumpy never fired a shot, never threw a punch, never even raised his voice. The system did the killing for him. When a man becomes the law, touching him is suicide. Al Capone fell in 1931. Federal conviction for tax evasion. 11 years in prison. The King of Chicago. Brought down not by bullets but by accountants. The newspapers declared it the end of an era. The death of the Chicago outfit. The collapse of Capone's empire. But in Harlem, the tribute kept flowing. Every week, 20% of the policy take got packed into briefcases and sent west. Not to Capone anymore, he was rotting in a cell in Atlanta. The money went to Frank Nitti now, then to Paul Ricca, then to Tony Accardo. The names changed, but the system didn't. Bumpy watched bosses rise and fall like seasons. Capone went to prison. Nitti ate a bullet. Schultz got gunned down in a restaurant. Legs Diamond got shot in his sleep. The men who'd started the war were all dead or behind bars. But the deal they'd made in that hotel room in 1928, that lived on. Nobody wrote it down. There was no contract, no official record, no paper trail for the feds to find. The IRS tore through Capone's finances looking for every illegal dollar and never found a single mention of Harlem. Because the smart money stays invisible. Stephanie died in 1969. Bumpy died in 1968. The men who'd negotiated the original deal were gone, buried, forgotten by everyone except the people who counted the money. But the tribute kept flowing. New generations took over. Young men who didn't know why Harlem paid Chicago. Only that it did. It became tradition. Then habit. Then just the way things worked. Like gravity. Like taxes. Like breathing. Detective Franklin retired in 1945 without ever figuring out what happened in 1928. He'd spent 17 years trying to understand how the violence stopped so suddenly, how the gangs made peace without a treaty, how Harlem stayed quiet for decades. He died, never knowing. The police files on the Harlem numbers war got boxed up and sent to storage. Case closed, violence ended. No arrests necessary. The official record showed nothing. No deal, no agreement, no explanation. Just results. History remembers the violence, remembers Dutch Schultz's brutality, Capone's empire, the gang wars that painted the streets red. But history doesn't remember the silence that followed, doesn't remember the invisible architecture that kept the peace, because the things that last longest are the things nobody writes down. In 1985, a young researcher at Columbia University was digging through old police records for a dissertation on organized crime. She found Franklin's notes, confused observations about the sudden end of violence in 1928, questions about who gave the order, speculation about hidden deals. She spent 6 months trying to verify it, interviewed old-timers, checked financial records, searched for any evidence of a secret agreement between Capone and Harlem's policy bankers. Found nothing. The people who knew were dead. The money had been laundered through so many hands it was untraceable. The structure had evolved so much that nobody even remembered it was built on a handshake in a Chicago hotel room. She concluded Franklin had been paranoid, that the violence ended because economics made it unsustainable, not because of some secret deal. She wrote her dissertation and moved on. The truth stayed buried, not because someone hid it, but because it had never been written down in the first place. That's the real power. Not the power to make people obey, the power to make them forget they're obeying. To build a system so deep into the foundation that nobody questions it. To create laws that enforce themselves because nobody remembers who made them or why. Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack in 1968, surrounded by family, peacefully in his sleep. The newspapers called him a Harlem folk hero, said he'd fought against white gangsters trying to take over black neighborhoods, made him a symbol of resistance. They had no idea he'd been the bridge, the man who'd sold Harlem's independence to buy its survival, the enforcer of a secret law that outlived every person who'd created it. His funeral was massive. Thousands showed up. Politicians, criminals, working folks, everyone. They celebrated the man who'd protected Harlem. None of them knew the full truth, and maybe that was the point. The tribute stopped flowing in the 1970s, not because someone ended it, just because the system that created it had evolved into something else. The Italian syndicates lost their grip. New powers rose. The old deals faded into irrelevance. But for 40 years, Harlem paid tribute to Chicago because two men in a locked room decided mathematics mattered more than pride. The files stayed closed. The story stayed secret. The truth stayed buried. Harlem doesn't remember who died. Harlem only remembers who made the rules. If this story just destroyed you, hit subscribe right now. We're uncovering the secrets powerful people buried for decades. If you were Bumpy walking into that room, knowing you might never walk out, would you make the same choice he did? Drop your honest answer below. Tomorrow's episode reveals what happened when someone tried to expose everything and why that person vanished without a trace. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. See you tomorrow.